Hello everyone. If you love touching animal stories and want to follow the inspiring journey of these adorable friends, don't forget to hit the subscribe button now so you won't miss any of our videos. Now, let's dive into today's emotional story. The summer heat bore down mercilessly on the cracked earth of a forgotten town in New Mexico. Not far from a dusty roadside lined with tumbleweeds and discarded soda cans, 3 German Shepherd puppies sat tied to an old fence post. Their legs were too shaky to stand for long, their ribs showing through their fur, and their cries hoarse from thirst. There was no food, no water, just a single fraying rope keeping them bound, abandoned like trash in the middle of nowhere. Dozens of cars passed. Some slowed, some drivers frowned, but no one stopped, until a black motorcycle screeched to a halt a few yards away, sending dust curling through the air. Eli Carter pulled off his helmet and squinted toward the shadows near the fence. He wasn't expecting to see anything today. He had just returned home 2 weeks ago, an ex-Marine, discharged after his 3rd deployment. The medals in his bag meant little compared to the wounds that wouldn't show up on scans. Wounds that woke him up at 3 a.m., sweating and shaking. But this was something else. A cry cut through the wind, thin, painful, terrified. Eli's boots crunched over gravel as he approached. There they were. 3 pups, no more than 7 weeks old. One had sandy fur and barely opened his eyes. Another, a small, pale female, lay slumped, barely moving. But the third, dark-coated and alert despite the sun, lifted his head and let out a rasping growl. Eli dropped to one knee. "Easy there, little guy," he whispered, voice coarse with dust and surprise. "I'm not here to hurt you." The pups shrank back, but the dark one didn't blink. Eli slowly pulled a pocket knife from his belt and began cutting the ropes. When the last pup was freed, he collapsed onto Eli's arms, boneless, weightless, heartbreakingly silent. Eli looked around. Empty roads. No one in sight. No sign of the person who'd done this. He cradled all 3 against his chest. "You're not dying out here," he murmured. "Not today." He strapped his helmet back on, tucked the pups gently into the satchel he'd once used for medical supplies, and rode straight to the only place that still felt like a sanctuary. His late grandfather's cabin at the edge of town. The place was dusty, quiet, untouched, just like he remembered. As he opened the door and stepped inside, the weight of the past crashed into the present. The cabin was where Eli had spent summers with his grandfather, a retired K-9 handler and war veteran who'd taught him how to read the soul behind a dog's eyes. He laid the pups on an old flannel blanket near the fireplace. They whimpered, twitching from exhaustion. Eli gently offered them water with a syringe. They drank, slowly, like creatures waking from a nightmare. That night, as the moonlight crept through the cabin's broken blinds, Eli sat beside them, haunted and hopeful. The smallest pup, the pale female, nestled against his leg. The sandy one curled tightly into himself. And the dark-coated one? He stared straight into Eli's eyes, unblinking, as if he already knew this man would never leave him behind. Morning in the New Mexico desert had always arrived in silence, but inside the cabin, a different kind of life stirred. The once-abandoned German Shepherd puppies, now safe, slowly began to regain their strength. Eli named them based on instinct. The small pale girl with the crescent-shaped patch on her chest became Luna. The sandy one, awkward and cheerful, became Rusty. And the bold, dark-coated pup with the piercing stare, the one who never looked away, he was Ash. Ash wasn't like the others. Even though he was barely old enough to eat on his own, his gaze was unshakable. He moved with caution, yet with purpose. When Eli tossed a small tennis ball toward the group, Rusty barked excitedly and chased it in circles. Luna hesitated, sniffed the ground. But Ash sat still, eyes trained on Eli's every movement. Watching, waiting. "You've got a soldier's soul," Eli muttered one morning, kneeling beside him. "What the hell were you bred for?" By the end of the week, the pups had settled into a routine. Eli cleaned the wounds around their necks, hand-fed them soft food, and massaged their tiny muscles to encourage circulation. At night, they slept at the foot of his bed, tangled together in a ball of warmth that made the cabin feel like a home again. Still, Eli couldn't shake the unease in his gut. There were signs. A black pickup parked too long near the edge of his land. A set of tire tracks in the dirt road that didn't match anything he drove. A man in town, older, bitter-looking, watched him too closely when he bought dog food and medical supplies. Something wasn't right. One evening, while digging through his grandfather's old file cabinet for some veterinary notes, Eli found a locked box. Inside were documents, training records, breeding charts, and one faded photograph. A German shepherd, almost identical to Ash, stood beside Eli's grandfather, both of them wearing tactical gear. The dog's nameplate read, K9 Unit Blaze. Classified Ops, Kia Syria, 2016. Eli froze. He flipped to the next page and saw a chart labeled Lineage Batch Number 043. Blaze X Delilah. Ash's birth litter. He realized then these weren't ordinary puppies. They were bred for service. War dogs. Meant for combat zones, police units, military partnerships. They weren't just thrown away. They were erased. But why? Later that night, a knock sounded at the door. Eli reached for his sidearm and opened it with caution. Standing outside was a man in a black coat, thin glasses, and a corporate smile that didn't touch his eyes. "Evening," the man said smoothly. "Name's Marcus Hale. I work with a private defense contractor. I believe you have something of ours." Eli's hand tensed on the doorframe. "Not sure what you mean." 3 shepherd pups. Classified bloodline. Property of K9 Elite Tactical Research Division. Eli didn't flinch. They were tied to a post and left to die. "I found them. That makes them nobody's but their own." Hale's smile flickered. "I'm not here to argue, Mr. Carter. Just to retrieve what belongs to us. Clean, easy. No problems. I think you're already too late for that." From behind him, Ash appeared, silent and still, his stance between Eli and the door. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He just stared. Hale's expression shifted. Something colder crept into his eyes. "That one," he said quietly, "is the reason we're here." Eli stepped forward, shoulders squared. "Then turn around. Because if you think you're taking them, you're going to find out I didn't survive 3 tours just to hand over the only innocent souls I've seen in a decade." Hale sighed. "We'll be in touch." He turned and walked back into the darkness, disappearing like smoke. Eli locked the door, checked every window, pulled the pups close and sat with his back against the wall, shotgun resting across his knees. He looked down at Ash, whose ears perked and eyes never blinked. "You knew before I did," Eli whispered. "Didn't you?" Outside, the desert wind howled. And inside, Eli Carter understood. This wasn't just a rescue anymore. This was war. Days turned into weeks, and Eli transformed his quiet desert cabin into a fortress. Reinforced doors, trail cameras, strategic lighting. He'd lived under threat before, and the instincts came back quickly. But it wasn't just about defense anymore, it was about preparation. If someone was coming for the pups, he needed them ready. He built a basic obstacle course out back, wooden planks for balance, tires to crawl through, walls to jump. Rusty clumsily flopped over everything, tail wagging. Luna needed encouragement, her steps tentative but eager to please. Ash moved like he'd done it all before. No hesitation, no need for direction. Eli stood at the edge of the training yard, jaw clenched. "You weren't just born for this," he muttered. "You were made." Ash stopped mid-run, turned, and locked eyes with him, unblinking. It was as if he understood everything. That night, as the wind danced over the sand and coyotes cried in the distance, Eli dug through more of his grandfather's files. He found documentation stamped confidential. Terms like unstable temperament, rejected litter, and euthanized by end of week. He sat back in disbelief. They were going to kill the whole litter. Not because they were sick or dangerous, but because they didn't meet some metric. Because they were inconvenient. He looked over at Luna and Rusty, curled up together by the fire, and at Ash, still awake, alert, eyes reflecting the glow. "You were never broken," he whispered. "They were just blind." The next day brought confirmation of his fears. One of the trail cameras snapped a shot at 3:14 a.m. A black SUV, headlights off, parked at the edge of his land. A tall figure exited, walked toward the cabin, and then stopped, watching, waiting, then vanished. Eli showed the image to the local sheriff, an old friend named Grady who had served with Eli's father in their younger days. Grady studied the photo carefully. "That's not local. No plates. No tracks we can trace. You sure this is just about some puppies?" Eli didn't answer, because he wasn't sure anymore. He returned home with fresh supplies and something new: a fire extinguisher and smoke detectors. Something in his gut said the danger wasn't finished. And he was right. That night, Eli awoke to Ash barking. Not playfully, not in warning, but with raw panic. Smoke, thick and black, curling through the cracks of the floorboards. Eli bolted up, grabbed his boots, and threw open the door to the hallway. The side of the cabin near the kitchen was ablaze, fire licking up the old wooden walls. The puppies scrambled in confusion, Luna whimpering, Rusty running in circles. Eli grabbed a wet blanket, wrapped it around them, and pushed them out the front door into the sand. But Ash didn't follow. "Ash!" Eli shouted. Through the haze, he saw the dark pup dash back into the burning kitchen, toward the cabinet drawer where Eli had left the confidential files and flash drives. "No!" Eli ran after him, coughing as heat seared his skin. He dropped low, navigating through the smoke-choked air. He found Ash pawing frantically at the cabinet, barking in desperation. Eli yanked open the drawer, grabbed the file, tucked it into his shirt, and scooped Ash into his arms. Together, they crashed through the back screen door just as the roof gave way, fire roaring in triumph. Outside, the desert night swallowed them. Eli collapsed onto the sand, cradling Ash. "You dumb, brave, beautiful soul," he whispered, his voice cracking. Ash licked his soot-covered hand, and for the first time since the fire began, Eli laughed. A broken sound of relief and disbelief. He turned to see Luna and Rusty huddled together, trembling but safe. They had survived. But something had changed. Ash hadn't just saved the files. He'd made a decision. He'd chosen to protect something. And Eli now knew with painful clarity, these dogs weren't just survivors. They were warriors. And they weren't running anymore. They were going to fight. The morning after the fire, the air still carried a faint scent of smoke. Eli stood in the ruins of his grandfather's cabin, charred beams and cracked stone. Nothing was salvageable except the precious documents Ash had saved. The sheriff, Grady, returned later that day after inspecting the scene. "No doubt about it," he said grimly, holding up a half-melted gas can found behind the cabin. "This was arson, and whoever did it knew exactly what they were doing." Eli nodded. His hands, still scraped and blistered, clenched into fists. They didn't just want the dogs. They wanted everything gone. No trace left. But they hadn't counted on Ash. Grady looked down at the three pups. Rusty sniffing his boots, Luna watching warily, and Ash sitting beside Eli like a soldier on post. "They're not just puppies, are they?" Grady asked softly. Eli handed over the recovered documents. Bloodlines, internal memos, rejection labels, and finally, the paper that made Grady's eyebrows shoot up. Batch 12X. Rejected for emotional sensitivity. Destroy by Friday. "Jesus," Grady muttered. That afternoon, Eli and the dogs relocated to an old barn Grady offered on the outskirts of town. Eli rebuilt what he could. Training areas, sleeping corners, a wall covered with notes and photographs. But something inside him had changed. This wasn't just about protection anymore. It was about exposure. It was about justice. Eli started documenting everything. Ash's remarkable obedience. Rusty's social instincts. Luna's emotional awareness with trauma survivors. He filmed the pup's progress and uploaded it online under a new name, Project Legacy. The response was overwhelming. Veterans wrote to him, families with autistic children, former handlers who had known Ash's sire valor, a decorated war dog. 1 week later, a woman named Dr. Miriam Lake, a whistleblower from the original breeding program, contacted him. "I saw your video," she said over the phone, "and I know those dogs. They're not rejects. They're the evolution of everything we were trying to achieve before the program got corrupted. Before they started throwing away potential just to cover mistakes." She offered to testify and expose the facility for what it was, a production line that destroyed lives to protect a brand. Eli met her in person 2 days later. Ash immediately responded to her, calm, alert, respectful. She broke down in tears as she stroked his fur. "He was supposed to be destroyed because he was too emotionally reactive," she whispered. "But what they called a flaw might actually be his greatest strength." With her help and the sheriff's support, they took the evidence to the state attorney general. An investigation was launched, the program's founder was suspended, and within weeks, headlines read, "Elite K9 breeding program under federal scrutiny for animal abuse, fraud." But that wasn't the end. It was the beginning. 6 months later, the barn had become something entirely new. The Ash Sanctuary, named after the dog who ran into fire to save his truth. Children came from miles away, some struggling with trauma, some with autism, some with fear. Veterans battling PTSD found solace in working with the dogs. Luna, once timid, became the heart of the program, crawling into the laps of crying children, sensing distress before it was even spoken. Rusty was everyone's best friend, racing around like a goofball, making people laugh when they needed it most. And Ash? Ash stood at the side of every demo, every school visit, every public appearance. Calm, fierce, focused. He was more than a rescue dog. He was a symbol, the symbol of what's possible when someone chooses to see worth in the forgotten. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the desert gold, Eli stood on the porch of the new training center. Ash sat beside him, watching the horizon. Eli placed a hand on his head. "You saved them," he whispered. "And you saved me." Ash looked up, tail giving a single steady wag. And together, in that moment of stillness, they understood what few ever do. That sometimes the greatest warriors are not forged in battle, but in abandonment. And sometimes those once thrown away are the ones meant to change the world. Message from the story. Legacy of the Forgotten is a powerful reminder that true value is not always found in what society labels as perfect or elite. Sometimes the ones discarded, the broken, the unwanted, the misunderstood, are the very souls who hold the greatest strength. Ash, Luna, and Rusty were cast aside as defects, left to die simply because they didn't fit a standard. But through one man's compassion and resilience, they not only survived, they became a beacon of hope, healing, and justice. This story speaks to anyone who has ever felt rejected, underestimated, or alone. It's a testament to second chances, to fighting for what others have given up on. It highlights the deep, unbreakable bond between humans and animals, especially the way dogs can mirror our pain, reflect our hope, and help us find purpose again. In a world that often moves too fast to see hidden worth, Legacy of the Forgotten urges us to pause and recognize that sometimes the greatest warriors are not those who charge into battle, but those who choose to stay, protect, and love against all odds. Because no life is ever truly forgotten when someone chooses to believe in it.